This presentation is going to cover herbaceous plant selection and management. We're going to look at identifying why and when we choose annual versus perennial herbaceous plants. We're going to look at knowing when and how to select the appropriate herbaceous plant for your landscape. Then we're going to know and apply seasonal management that's going to help you take care of those herbaceous annual and perennial plants in your landscape. So first, just a few numbers. The green industry is a huge industry, the horticulture industry. In 2019, according to the USDA, nearly $14 billion in sales across the U.S. 2019, also according to the USDA, potted flowers sales were up about 11% to $1.2 billion. So you're looking at more house plants, but still herbaceous plants. At home, horticulture increased in popularity with more people at home gardening for greater periods of time. And 2020 brought in approximately 16 million new gardeners. 80% of them are saying that they will continue gardening in 2021. So we're going to look at plant life cycles. So an annual that lives for 1 year. Its life cycle is to create a seed to repopulate itself. So when it lives for 1 year, it means it's completing that complete life cycle. So it's going from seed to producing a seed in 1 year's time. Biennials are a little bit different. They are kind of a hybrid between an annual and a perennial. It takes them 2 years to complete that whole life cycle. The first year, after they germinate, they create this rosette. It does winter over. And then the next year, that rosette then sends up shoots, creates the flowers, creates the seeds, and then it has completed its life cycle. Perennials, they'll live for many years before reaching maturity. Herbaceous plants grow. They grow from the crown of the plant, so right above the roots to the top each year. That top does die back. However, the crown of the plant and the roots do not. And then woody plants, they will persist year round above ground. This topic, we're going to look at herbaceous plants. So we're really only going to look at annuals and perennials. These annuals are something that you're going to have to do every year. They kind of add that pizzazz to a lot of your landscapes, going to add that continuous color throughout the season. Lots of massive displays of colors and textures and forms you can add by using annual plants, especially when you're looking at some bigger landscape beds or containers or those sorts of things. Breeders are continually adding more and more new plants, and especially compact plants for more of the urban settings as they work through breeding cycles. So there's a couple different annual plants that you need to kind of think of when you're looking at these. There's a cool season, so those are really best grown when the temperatures are a little bit cooler, between 70 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of times we'll see those here in Nebraska where we're planting those earlier in the spring. Pansies, snapdragons, those kinds of things. We kind of see those in the spring. They really don't do well in our heat of the summer. And then sometimes we'll see those kind of come back in the fall. The other one that we have are warm season. So those are the ones that really do like our hot temperatures in the summertime. They do prefer the evening temperatures to go down some. Some of them really do like humidity. Some of them don't like humidity. So it kind of depends on that, and depends on how humid our summers are. Um, and remember, our summers are going to be much more humid on the eastern side of the state than on the western side of the state. So annuals are also kind of categorized again in some different categories. So we have hardy annuals that can tolerate a light frost. Those early cool season ones that we just talked about. So pansies would be one of those. A lot of times you'll see pansies go out, as soon as St. Patrick's Day, mid March, and then they will make it through, May until you can get those warm season annuals out. Have hardier ones that will continue, kind of work a little bit more cool, damp periods. They may be damaged by a little bit of light frost, but sometimes they kind of will grow out of it. Salvia would be an example of kind of a half hardy one, something that you would think of that kind of has a perennial aspect to it. And then tender are native to warm tropical plants, very sensitive to fall temperatures. Definitely not going to be able to make it even through a light frost. And impatience would be one of those. So looking at biannuals, those are something that are very interesting to add to your landscape and a good herbaceous plant to kind of play around with. The life cycle, like I said earlier, has to have 2 years of growing season to complete its life cycle. Its first season, it will have this rosette, usually very full of foliage, doesn't get very tall, and then it will die back and kind of just sit there over the winter, and then the next year, then that's when it will definitely do all of its work and produce that seed that it really wants to do. Digitalis is one that you think of as a biannual. Hollyhocks are another one that you think of is a biannual. Stock is another biannual. There are some that they'll just kind of use as an annual. They don't really care that it's not producing the flower. But normally that's really why we're doing annuals, is because you want to produce that flower. You want that ornamental aspect in your landscape. So finally, perennials. These are the hardiest ones that we have. Many perennials will only flower for a handful of weeks within its growing season. Gardeners actually do plan out perennials much more diligently than they do annuals. Not that you don't design with annuals and plan them out, but you can actually plan the perennials out where you actually have flowering all year long. You'll have some that, when you don't have as many leaves on the trees, that will take some of that sun, but then it will take the shade. Once those leaves are on the trees, you can have early spring flowering, midsummer flowering, late fall flowering. Sometimes people will combine these with shrubs also, so that's another thing that you can do when you're looking at perennials. You're going to get multiple years of growth out of these. There are more and more that are being bred that are kind of short-lived perennials. A lot of those kind of funky echinaceas, like tomato soup, was one that we've actually tried in our gardens on campus. Really only lasted for about 2 years. It did come back the second year, and I think maybe even a third year it came back, but it was just not very thrifty. Um, just just something that you just have to know as a gardener, that sometimes you're going to have a plant that does well and lasts for years and years and years, and is a great gift plant where you can divide it and give it to other fellow gardeners. Some you're going to be able to enjoy it for a handful of years, and then you're going to have a new landscape opportunity. Just remember that many herbaceous perennials can grow a flower, and for many years they will only last for 3 or 4 years. Just kind of spoke about that. Um, so just remember that. Very important to remember. So, why choose a perennial versus an annual? Well, there's lots of reasons. There's a wider diversity of perennials to choose from, which allows more colors, textures, and fragrances. It's easier to find perennials that thrive under different sun exposures and types and moisture levels. If annuals can't grow in a particular location, a perennial is often a better fit. Perennials do survive many years without replanting, thus a less costly endeavor. So that's something to think about. Perennials, yes, maybe cost a little bit more up front, but you're going to get more years out of it. They are often something that you can divide and spread about either your landscape or a neighbor's landscape or a friend's landscape. Planting them in big masses and sweeps is very ornamental and very great to add into big, huge landscape beds. Multi-season interests, like I said, you can definitely plan out the color and the texture to go from spring to fall. So lots of different things that why you would choose perennials. But why would you choose an annual? Well, they're going to bloom for a longer amount of time, usually going to bloom all season for you. They're going to produce more flowers. They're usually much showier and brighter, and they can self-seed, where also perennials can also self-seed. So what would you do and what would I do? Normally I add and combine the two. So you have perennials, you have shrubs, you have them both where you can have this base landscape, but you can add those annuals in for those bits of color and texture and that kind of stuff, and add those annuals into some containers throughout your landscape. So the next thing we're going to learn is plants' response to temperatures. Many plants require specific temperatures to complete their life cycles, whether it's to start germinating. Some plants need shorter day lengths to flower. Some need longer day lengths to flower. Cold temperatures are needed for a lot of plants to initiate flowers, cold hardiness, or seed germination. In Nebraska, we have three different hardiness zones. We have some great maps that you have access to that you can go and find and make sure that you know exactly what hardiness zone you are. And that's just really a good question to know. And we'll ask you that in a later piece for the hands-on project. Plant tags. Pretty much all herbaceous plants, all woody plants, when you purchase them, all have plant tags. Those plant tags are really your guide to what that plant's going to do. It's going to give you the height, the width, the spacing that you're going to need. It's going to have the color of the flower. It's going to tell you when it's going to flower. It's going to tell its light requirements. You can pretty much find everything that plant's environmental needs are on that plant tag. So plants respond, so there's a lot of changing. So there's to plants' temperatures responses. So knowing what that plant tag says and knowing what your plants do really do help you Make sure that you're putting them into the landscape correctly. Knowing the climate and the microclimate of your landscape is very important. Knowing where the north winds come from, south winds come from, your shade patterns, where the hottest part of the day is on your landscape. Knowing all those and knowing those environmental factors in your landscape are very important when you're working with annual or herbaceous plants. There's lots of personal preferences that you can choose to meet those requirements. There's more and more new selections coming out each year. So it's always fun to go and check all the new catalogs and check your local nurseries to find those and try them out. Share them with a friend if they do well, and know that sometimes they're only going to last for a couple, 3 years.